Hello, and welcome to the Compact Podcast. This week we're discussing Julian Assange's plea deal, the resounding defeat of Jamaal Bowman by the Westchester County Executive George Latimer in the Democratic primary for New York's 16th Congressional District, and in the UK, the frankly sordid and shoddy revelations of betting on the part of MPs on the election date, and one Labour MP who bet against himself to lose in the forthcoming general election. I'm your host, Nina Power, and I'm joined today by Sohrab Ahmari and Matthew Schmitz. So, Julian Assange, there is some discussion. People are kind of surprised by the plea deal. So, obviously, he pled guilty on one count. He spent the last few years in Belmarsh, which is in the UK. It's in Woolwich. It's a very, very, very unpleasant, high security prison. He was kept inside for 23 hours a day. Otherwise, he was surrounded by 200 plus books in his cell. And was allowed out only for an hour at a time. He's obviously, before that, he was in the Ecuadorian embassy and has basically been on the run on various sexual offences, which were actually dropped in 2019. Of course, Julian Assange is responsible for WikiLeaks and has been a hacker for a very long time. He's part of a kind of position that says that people have the right to know what their governments are doing. He leaked many, many documents about Hillary Clinton and so on. There's already been quite a lot of speculation that the plea deal, obviously it's taking place ahead of the forthcoming US elections. It could well have been an object of the election. There could have been battling over whether Trump or Biden was going to pardon Assange. Obviously, that's not quite possible, seeing as he has accepted a plea deal. There's other speculation that Assange maybe has agreed to delete some information that he had. But of course, this kind of situation is absolutely ripe for conspiracy theories of all kinds. So, what do you guys make of Assange's plea deal? What's it about?
The post-Watergate era of American press freedom is over, and maybe never existed in the way that we tend to think. The heroic image of Woodward and Bernstein, exposing the operations of power to widespread acclamation, um, is promoted in movies like All the President's Men, starring the dashing Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman. We published in April 2023 at compactmag.com an article, How the Deep State Took Down Nixon by Nathan Penkovsky. That widely shared article is part of a broader range of reassessments of the Watergate era, a reassessment that's driven not just by kind of new polemical imperatives, but by a really impressive body of research that has been coming out on Nixon. And as Penkovsky explains, Nixon was opposed by powerful elements within the security apparatus. So what we saw in Watergate wasn't just the heroic press and heroic leakers working against state. It was elements of the state working against some other element of the state, and clearly, that conception that, oh well, the press can kind of do what it wants, say what it wants, uh, even when it's very much to the detriment of the national security state. That just isn't true. It isn't real. So I would say let's please just retire the self-flattering myth. Let's give up on this heroic conception o- of the press and realize that they're engaged in a more modest endeavor.
I guess I have more of a an observation than a political comment per se, and that's to track the shift in the reception of Assange on the American right, or maybe the right more broadly. And what I mean by that is, okay, well, I remember those events happening 2010, if I recall. It was like peak WikiLeaks period, and there was, except for certain kind of odd and eccentric corners of the American right, there was uniform opposition to what had been done on the part of the uh, conservatives who were basically, fully on board with the projects of American power, especially over in the post 9/11 era, that decade that had passed at that point. I remember almost no kind of mainstream conservatives saying that, hey, maybe it's good that we have some access to the kind of internal machinations of power, or the ways in which American power, drones people, or uses firepower against civilians and so on. All the details that Assange brought forth, nothing, at the time. And I was part of the kind of neoconservative hawkish right at the time, and we were all just utterly horrified, not by the content of the leaks, but by the fact of the leaks. And I would say that, I guess 14 years later, 14, I'm 14 years older, and so is everyone else. That's a more mixed picture. Much of the American right, the online right, but not just the online right, the mainstream right as well, considers him a kind of folk hero. And there isn't that kind of, how dare you go against the American national security state, or how dare you embarrass the American national security state, on most of the right, except for like the bulwark types, or the conservatives ish types at like the Atlantic, or like, of course, still anti Assange. But everywhere else there's a kind of openness, and uh, frankly, it isn't hard to explain what's happened in the 14 years since, or however long it's been, 14, 15 years, over that course of the decade and a half. The post 9/11 wars were turned out to be just utter disasters, failures, waste of lives and treasure. Then you saw kind of the ramping up of the security state, not against foreign adversaries, but against domestic populists, especially the Trump movement, beginning in 2016 with, I don't need to spell them out, but the Russiagate hoax, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, the COVID experience. You put all that together, and the American right, especially the GOP base, just stands in a different posture in relation to the national security state than it did in 2010, 2009. And I would say that overall, this is actually a healthy small d development. That, you know, I'm not a pacifist. I think there's always going to be conflict between nations, and I want my side to win. I am not a. I'm also not naive about the need for intelligence, for kind of the darker arts that are needed for our decision makers to stay ahead. I'm not naive about any of that, but still, this is an enormous power, and especially if this enormous power is going to interfere in our domestic political affairs and put its thumb on the scales in terms of how people vote, and trying to derail a president's for going against its precepts, even in a minor way, which what they tried to do to Donald Trump, then I think we should be even more for the kind of gonzo accountability that Assange represented. So I'm largely, I said I would just make an observation, but I ended up making a normative statement. But I think it's healthy that we don't see a figure like Assange as purely a villain anymore.
Yeah, I really like that phrase you just used of gonzo accountability. I think this is exactly right. Like, I think Assange is basically a kind of folk hero in the sort of tradition of Robin Hood. And if you speak to people in South America, for example, he's just clearly a hero. And I think for with all of the caveats that Matthew was making about journalism, I think there's a sense in which that kind of information wants to be free. I mean, it's not even journalism, right? Like at that point, just leaking information or letting people then look through the files for themselves. And I remember with Snowden and the revelations about the NSA, this was a huge deal. I mean, we all know that we're kind of being surveyed, our data is being mined, and but we sort of at the same time we don't know, right? We sort of continually kind of forget that we're also participating in this huge information gathering exercise. And I think the revelations in general were very, very powerful for people to understand that their information was being read and manipulated potentially. And, not because the state particularly cares about any one individual, but actually, as Sohrab pointed out, I think this increasing suspicion and awareness actually of the state and all of these agencies, and distrust, legitimate distrust of these institutions, has only grown in the interceding years, which is why I think Assange is a sort of multifaceted hero in different ways. I mean, maybe hero is too strong, but a character that can appeal to people across the spectrum for different reasons. But I think we should keep our mind open as to why he not why he accepted the plea deal, because of course he wanted to get out of prison, as anybody would, but I think why this was even proposed to him. Were there conditions to him accepting this deal, which maybe will come out? We'll see. I think there's going to be more to this story. Okay, so back to New York, which is in something of a heat wave as we are here in London, but a more genteel heat wave, without air conditioning, which I'm against anyway. So in this 16th, sorry for shaking his head, in the Democratic primary for the 16th congressional district, which I'm sure you two are both very familiar with, we had this battle between Jamaal Bowman and George Latimer, which involved various claims about Palestine. Jamaal Bowman's very pro-Palestinian, kind of a sort of socialist, and it seemed like the battle got kind of quite unpleasant. But what do you two make of this victory for Latimer in the Democratic primary, and what does it tell us about the forthcoming presidential elections?
Well, it's certainly a sign of the very deep fractures within the Democratic Party. Bowman, has taken a stance that's strongly critical of Israel's conduct in response to the October 7th atrocities, and I tend to look at Bowman as one part of a story that is maybe less about Latimer than it is about the squad or the broader people who were once identified as progressive Democrats. Bowman uh, veered more to the left, so to speak, on these issues, more critical of Israel, more supportive of Palestine. Then you have someone like John Fetterman, the senator from Pennsylvania, who, while not a member of the squad as such, was closely identified with the progressive wing of the party, taking a strongly pro-Israel line. So October 7 was uh, obviously an epical event for the history of the state of Israel, but it was also a very real event in American politics that changed things. Uh, and you've, I think, seen that change in a variety of ways. Uh, it's June in New York. There is a kind of quieter approach to Pride this June than we've seen in previous years. There are a lot of things behind that, including the successful boycott of Bud Light, the way that Target was singed last year by its stocking of Pride merchandise. But one of the things that's going on here is uh, that people have come face to face with uh, the new Pride flag, the Progress Pride flag, which includes not just the kind of rainbow of the older kind of Betsy Ross era version pride flag. It's not just the rainbow stripes, right? But there's that chevron coming in where you have the black and the brown. So an identification with certain minoritarian concerns, a certain decolonizing rhetoric, along with the trans stuff. And for pride, as it's now understood for many people, and you've seen this at pride parades, it isn't just about gay liberation or kind of queer liberation as such. That is considered to be intimately tied to the liberation of oppressed people worldwide. And first of all, the Palestinians. That's the understanding of pride. In a profile, very good profile in the New Yorker by Benjamin Wallace Wells, John Fetterman and his wife mentioned that for the first time in years, they're not going to the Pride Parade this year because they don't feel comfortable because they expect it to be pro-Palestinian. Um, I've made this answer almost more about Fetterman than about Bowman, but I just say Bowman has sort of veered in the other direction, and saying, yes, Palestine is the issue. And so I see the kind of need to pick sides, among Democrats, including progressive Democrats, is something that has really fractured some old coalitions and created some new realities on the ground. Uh, you know, I don't think this is the need be the end of the squad as such. In a way, it's already changed. It's already evolved. I think AOC is probably well on her way to becoming a mainstream kind of progressive Democrat. I don't really think she's in danger in her district, but um, probably Sohrab has some clearer thoughts on that than I do.
I do not. Neither Matthew or I is the horse race type where we just watch county by county at a granular level. In part because there's lots of people out there who do that, and doesn't seem like
Returns are coming in from Bucks County.
yeah.
You know,
I always love the like the sort of very vernacular names for it's like the burnt over district of New York. You're like, what is that?
Steve Kornacki is the master of this, and so the best election coverage is always Steve Kornacki on MSNBC nerding out about something, and then uh, I say this in the most nonpartisan way possible. It's best if the Republicans are winning in horrifying fashion, because then he tosses it back to Rachel Maddow and she looks shell shocked, and that's just the best television. Um, whether the
Yes.
political outcome is good or bad.
There is a space for, I think, the politics that Jamaal Bowman represents or could represent ideally, but he doesn't, which is restraint oriented on foreign policy, welfarist on various domestic issues. And it's like, why can't one of these people presented in a way that is not distasteful to ordinary people? And what I mean by that is I was just looking up his old blog posts, and okay, this was in 2014 when he was still a school principal, and he had engaged in quite prolific 9/11 trutherism. And of course, for me, 9/11 trutherism is not the kind of thing you can change your mind about. It's not like saying, oh, I used to believe in high taxes, now I believe in low taxes. I was for engaging China, now I'm against engaging China. I changed my mind about the war on terror, whatever. Like this sort of, those are all areas where you can sort of say, hey, I held this view, then experience taught me that that was wrong, or my values even changed, and so I changed my, even if the experience wasn't that important a factor, my values changed, fine. But like, if you've engaged in 9/11 conspiracism, that is not just, it's not just an opinion, it's that you have a kind of sick conspiratorial cast of mind. It's just like you're saying, well, I used to be a Holocaust denier, and then I changed my mind. Actually, it rarely actually happens. Like, if you're a Holocaust denier, they have their famous strategies where they say that the Holocaust didn't happen, but by the way, the Jews deserved it. That's the kind of shift people make if you're a hater like that. And same thing with 9/11 conspiracy theory. I mean, the only reason we have a backtracking on the part of Jamaal Bowman about his views on who did 9/11 is the fact that someone dug up um, the old blog posts on blogpost.com, rest in peace. And
So sorry, can I ask who did he pin the blame anywhere in
no,
particular?
he blamed it on
Yeah.
himself. He just said, like, I had a lot of strong opinions at the time, and
Oh, sorry. I mean the blame for the attacks. Like, who did he think or suggest did it?
Oh, I mean, it's the classic sort of inside job,
Yeah.
Yes, it's not. It's nothing surprise. It's not like aliens or anything, but it's just the classic version of 9/11 trutherism, and yeah, I mean, that to me, that's it's very sad that a politics that wants to promote restraint, although the squad hasn't even achieved really that when it comes to Ukraine. I mean, they've been quite pusillanimous when it comes to Ukraine, but whatever they try to represent as this kind of foreign policy restraint oriented domestic welfareism, can it not be tinged with 9/11 trutherism? And by the way, I have to say there are versions of this on the populist right too, where it's like, can we get restraint around foreign policy that doesn't veer into weird territories? And sometimes we do, and sometimes we do on the left as well, to be perfectly clear. But I mean, I think the Jamaal Bowman experience should be a reminder to people on the left who want to promote this kind of politics that, the personnel you choose and how crazy and abrasive they seem matters, because at the end of the day, you know, ordinary people will judge you on that and on personality and what you've said in the past. And can you just find a non-lunatic?
A non-lunatic in politics. And Jamaal Bowman, I just recalled, was the man who pulled a fire alarm during a debate, something like this.
Yes, because he didn't want to like vote on a legislation or something. I can't remember what the details are anymore, but it was a. Do you remember, Matthew?
I think it was funding for Israel in some way.
Yes, that's right.
It also bears mention that Jamaal Bowman is surely the strongest member of Congress, soon to be former member. There's a video that was posted on Twitter by himself of him doing a bench press of 3 reps of 405 pounds. That's pretty extraordinary. So he's really just this incredibly strong guy. He should be kind of celebrated by the online lifting bros. And then I was also quite struck by another video of him just standing in the halls of the U.S. Capitol, seemingly outside the U.S. House chamber, and he was kind of shouting in this hysterical way about some kind of gun safety bill, restriction on gun sales, which I'm, without being a Second Amendment absolutist, I tend to think that these bills are generally ill-conceived and likely to be ineffective. And then along came Congressman Thomas Massie, the Libertarian, who began kind of autistically explaining to Bowman how, there's never been a school shooting in a school where the teachers are armed. And I just thought, American politics is so crazy. It is so crazy. You have this guy who, maybe isn't the greatest congressman ever, but he can lift a ton of weight, just having breakdowns about some ill-advised gun control legislation, and someone comes along saying, well, sir, if we just put a Glock on the hip of every teacher, all would be rectified. And this isn't a political assessment. I would just say that sometimes you have to sit back and enjoy the passing parade. And what a crazy country we live in.
Can I just recount my favorite version of these kinds of encounters? It features, I think, Thomas Massie's closest sort of spiritual, ideological predecessor or ancestor, namely Representative Ron Paul. And it was during the 2012 Republican primaries. And you had Matthew, who was the Texas governor who became Secretary of Energy under Trump. Do you remember that?
Was that Rick Perry?
Rick Perry, that's okay. Right. And you had Rick Perry, and he's like, now there are 3 departments of the government that we have to cut. And he's like, the Department of Education, the Department of whatever. And then he couldn't remember. He couldn't remember the third one. And he's like all sweating. And he's like, oh, I guess I had a brain fart. But then behind him, this is the miracle of this. Behind him is Ron Paul is standing there. He's like trying to get into the camera. And he's leaning over and he's like, no, there are 5 departments. It's 5. And he's like waving his hand. And you imagine someone is having a nervous moment where he can't remember the third thing. And this guy's back there being like, no, it's 5. You have to remember 4 more. Anyway, American politics is just, I love this country. That's all.
Yeah, I have to say, as ever, your politics is far more cinematic in every good and every bad way than ours, which is just kind of pathetic. So political betting, I don't know if people engage in this a lot in the States, but political betting is quite a big thing here. So if you're kind of nerdy and you don't really like football and other things that people normally bet on, you can basically bet on any aspect of the election or any voting thing, and it's kind of fun. Some of them are really absurd. So, like, for example, you could put out a bet and say, oh, Nigel Farage is going to become the next prime minister, and it would be like 9,000 to 1, and you could put like a quid on or whatever. Anyway, it turns out that our increasingly depressingly, quotidianly sordid political class, who are corrupt in every which way, are also engaging, well, have recently engaged, several of them, mainly Tory MPs, possibly some police officers, maybe some Labour MPs as well, at least one, have engaged in political betting based on their understanding of the election date. So obviously the date was publicly announced as July the 4th, but previously it clearly had been circulating among various groups of people who had put on often very small bets, which makes it even sadder, to be honest, very shoddy, like a £4 bet on the date of the next general election. And of course they had prior knowledge or inside knowledge. So now we have several MPs and police officers under investigation for by the Gambling Commission, which is the industry watchdog, for basically not playing fair. And this is just, I think, further evidence of the depressing state of politics in the UK. It's not even corruption on a large scale. It's just self-seeking, banal, shoddy behavior. So yeah, and it looks like the police leaked the names. So they're all sort of being made public. This looks bad, obviously, for Rishi Sunak, who's still nominally the prime minister of the country, even though he kind of veers from increasingly one embarrassment to another. He left early at a war memorial event and a war, to remember the war. And yeah, he's basically given up already. And yeah, this is the state of play in the UK. So I don't know how the UK is looking from outside. Obviously, we've got Farage. We discussed that last week as a kind of wild card, but really, he's not going to win. Reform are not going to win more than one seat, if that. And he's just there to mess about. And there's a sort of real lack of discussion of any serious issues. Like, this is not an election that is about the economy. This is not an election about the future of Britain. This is an election that Labour are going to win by default. And it seems to me that every vote now is really like a protest vote rather than a vote for anything positive. It's a country that feels very much in decline, that is not in control of its destiny in many ways, that is being governed by a bunch of just slimy, corrupt people who are never going to confront the city and never actually going to make life better for younger people in particular.
You mentioned, Nina, the fact that people are betting on this as though it were a sporting event, and maybe they should be betting on a sporting event. And just a couple minutes ago, I was talking about the kind of passing parade in American politics. I think it's an important question. Does politics matter? Do these political contests matter? And in the UK, you can say yes, there will be serious changes afoot if Labour is elected. I don't know what all is being contemplated. Maybe the House of Lords, as it now exists, will likely end, or uh, some other progressive measures will be brought in. Uh, Probably things will be more pro-trans. They will be more, yeah, certain things like that. Um, but you know, Britain was the site of the most remarkable uh, political event, probably since the end of the Second World War, which was Brexit, a real uprising against the wishes of the ruling class. And uh, Brexit sort of happened. It formally occurred, but what the Brexit voters voted for didn't occur, and there doesn't seem to be any prospect of it occurring. There are maybe fewer Polish painters in the UK, but I don't believe that immigration as such has gone down, nor has there, just nor has there really been a change in the political economic settlements, despite the kind of passing vogues for red Toryism and blue labor and other ideas that are trying to give shape and form to the desires of those voters. So I think if I were a voter in the UK, uh, I would say, all right, well, what am I voting for? Probably a version of that question can be asked in America vis-a-vis Trump. And once again, yes, we can identify lots of ways in which it matters in the US whether you vote for a Republican or a Democrat, for a Bowman or a Latimer. There are real policy differences and real effects. Uh, Things may be uh, disanalogous between the US and Britain. Maybe the US, well, so certainly the US is the seat of kind of imperial power in the Western order and the free world. That's where the seat of the power is. But can that power really be accessed by political means? Does the power really reside in the formal political system such that it can be changed by votes at the ballot box? I think that's one big question.
I just want to continue my sort of joshing tone from the last segment and just note that Rishi Sunak wears the tightest pants of any world leader ever. And I think that there's talk of him not only losing the premiership, that's almost guaranteed, but also losing his own seat, his own constituency. And you kind of understand why, because today Tim Montgomery, who's a friend of mine, used to be a Times of London columnist, posted a picture of Sunak and David Cameron. I think it's because they're visiting Buckingham Palace for some occasion or other. They're in morning dress, which is kind of the long tail, but with the gray pants, and Rishi Sunak's are so tight. They're like a skateboard kid's kind of jeans. And this is a problem. I mean, I think this is. I'm going to become like Derek's suit guy here, but no one who wears pants that tight belongs anywhere close to power. I think I really dislike Sunak. What was it, Nina, where he went to a homeless shelter and he was like feeding the poor, and he was one guy came up with his
Okay,
plate.
so when Lyndon Johnson was president, he called up a company called Hager to order some pants, and he gave very specific instructions. He said,
Hello, hello. Now, another thing, the crotch down where your nuts hang is always a little too tight. So when you make them up, give me an inch that I can let out there, because they cut me. They're just like riding a wire fence. These are the best that I've had anywhere in the United States.
so think about, if LBJ was suffering in his pants, what kind of a wire fence is Rishi Sunak riding? And I pity the man. It's obviously a certain kind of asceticism is still operative in our society.
Yeah. And also, just to go back to why I mean, all policy aside, kind of dislike him, is just the fact that he went to a homeless shelter to like feed the poor, and one guy came up and Rishi Sunak asked him, "So what do you do?" But isn't this not happen, Nina? Am I hallucinating this? He asked
No,
like
there is a story. He went to some soup kitchen, as they're called, I guess, and he asked a homeless person, "Do you work in business?"
that's what it is. It's even worse.
It's even worse. I mean, this is someone who, when he was younger, he went to all these like posh schools, boarding schools, like whatever, and public schools. And somebody found a piece of footage of him when he was a teenager talking about poor people, and he said, "Well, of course, I've never met any." Something like this. Like, this is just somebody who's in this bubble. He's married, I think, to a billionaire. I mean, this class of person are um unfortunately uh, dominant in our politics, and it shows.
I think Buttigieg would be like that in the United States. People keep talking about Buttigieg as like the inheritor of the Democratic mantle, and I think he would have a strong Rishi Sunak effect. Sort of used to be a consultant like McKinsey, all of that. It's going to look terrible. Just wait. I think Gavin has like the better shot just because he's handsome and female voters reportedly like him a lot. And so like Gavin is our Trudeau, Buttigieg is our Rishi Sunak. That's my
Yeah. And most
of-
likely we're going to get Starmer, who's like a kind of, I don't know, bureaucratic Terminator, who's so boring. It's like, this Dan Hitchens line about you could Bluetooth him or something. I mean, he really is this like catastrophic technocrat.
I think that's the funniest line that has ever appeared in a compact piece is Dan Hitchens describing the tinny quality of Sir Keir's voice as being it's the kind of voice that makes you think you might accidentally plug into him via Bluetooth. I love that line.
Yeah. Anyway, it's going to be another depressing few years in British politics. There you go. So I think we've probably come to the end in this very hot podcast with lots of tight trousers. And so with that, I'd like to thank Sohrab, Matthew, and Stephen Adibatu, our producer. Don't forget to subscribe at compactmag.com if you haven't already. And thank you for listening.